Good morning, everybody. My name is Oriel Miller. I'm the director of the Institute for Welsh Affairs, the IWA. We're Wales's leading independent think tank with a long track record of shaping debates and influencing change in Wales through policy and advocacy, through our online and print publications, which provide platforms for robust comment and debate, and our agenda-setting events. We're a membership organisation with members across the country and far further afield too. We're funded by our members, the events we run ourselves, and independent trusts and foundations. This is our 7th Rethinking Wales panel discussion, and we're running them on Thursdays at 11 AM. This week, we're in partnership with Wales Arts International. Next week, as part of our ongoing debate partnership with Cardiff University, we'll be focusing on will COVID-19 be the making or breaking of devolution. A few housekeeping issues before we get started. You've probably already noticed that you've been muted by us as you join us. We're going to use the sidebar chat for questions. If you want to ask a question, you'll be very welcome. Please use the sidebar to send the moderator a question by using the drop-down arrow so it says to moderator. Please remember that all chat questions are recorded. We're going to be keeping to an hour, but we'll also keep the chat room open after midday so that you can continue to connect with each other and reflect on the conversation. For those of you who haven't joined us before, we started this series of discussions to shine a light on what matters most to people now in all sorts of different sectors in this, our new reality, and to start to look further ahead than the immediate crisis. We're deliberately trying to bring people together across policy boundaries because we're not yet able to meet in person. We'll hear from our panellists in a moment, but we also want to hear from you in our chat room and on Twitter using the hashtag Rethinking Wales. Culture is a vital part of our well-being and of our communities. The current crisis presents extreme challenges for the arts. Our venues, cultural companies, artists and freelancers are likely to be the last to fully emerge from lockdown, which presents some really heightened practical challenges. Nick Capaldi from the Arts Council of Wales said the council's portfolio is losing 1.4 million a week. And we already know that it's been the organisations least reliant on public funds and most reliant on ticket sales which have been the hardest hit. Julian Bird, Chief Exec of UK Theatr, told MPs this week that 70% of theatres and production companies would run out of cash before the end of the year. This paints a very worrying picture for cultural venues in Wales. Acting Chair of the Senate's Culture Committee, Helen Mary Jones, MS, put it succinctly when she said, "We cannot risk losing a generation of artists or abandoning all of the positive work and investment which has gone into making Wales a world leader in arts and culture." In today's Rethinking Wales, we're going to be exploring these immediate challenges and looking for solutions. I'm really pleased to introduce today's panellists. We have Gethin Evans, Artistic Director of Fran, joining us. Graeme Farrow, Artistic Director of the Wales Millennium Centre. Rabab, Ghazoul, artist and founder and director of Gentle Radical, and Gwennan Mair Jones, Director of Creative Engagement at Theatr Clwyd. Welcome to you all. I'd like to start, Gethin, with you, please. Franwen's a really exciting, challenging and inspiring theatre for young people. From your perspective, what are the particular challenges that you face as a result of COVID-19? Where do you see the opportunities that perhaps things might now be possible that weren't before? And what's something, an idea or an action that can be implemented or taken to ensure cultural venues not only survive, but also thrive?
Thank you, Oriel. Bore da pawb. Thanks for having me. I've written it down because I have a tendency to ramble, so I'm going to read if that's all right.
Of course.
So I've been asked to start with the challenges we face in light of COVID. And in order to really see the challenges, I'd like to take a look at the fundamental elements of what it is that we do. We collaborate with communities, we observe, we listen, we respond through collaboration with, in no hierarchical order, but simply the ones that first came to me. Stage management, designers, marketeers, actors, writers, producers, composers, musicians, movement directors, carpenters, dancers, beatboxers, to name but a few. Together, we carefully respond to our communities and the wider world through conceiving stories, concepts, events, and characters. We interrogate these ideas and dream up alternative realities and futures. We leap into the unknown to discover what is possible through collaboration and conversation between artists and communities. When a piece of theatre is ready and the final essential ingredient returns, although in exceptional practice, I'd argue that the audience should never leave the room. And here's the bit with the challenge. In a space together, be it on the side of a mountain, in a primary school, a town high street, a pub, or one of our brilliant theatres, the lights go down and we share a moment. We are bound. We watch and witness people encounter and negotiate their way through events and feelings. We see people struggle and thrive. We understand ourselves through witnessing others. At the heart of this experience is coming together, to empathise, to feel the energy of the room shift and change as 100, 300, 500, 1200 hearts synchronise for that moment in time with one story. So why is this communing of importance? For entertainment, of course, but also to draw focus to the unheard voices, for our health and our well-being, to celebrate the ignored, to make exceptional pieces of work rooted in celebrating and interrogating Welsh culture and identity, to enable expression, reflection, debate, and in its best form, positive community and individual change. I must stress theatre companies are so much more than shows. All of what I've said is at the heart of every workshop, conversation, and exchange. So what isn't possible in light of COVID? Yes, there are many financial implications that I'm sure will come up this morning. We are planning and replanning, micromanaging budgets, and hoping we will make it through. Our sector is showing true resilience as artists and companies across Wales adapt to change. But we must acknowledge what we currently cannot do, what makes theatre a fundamental part of community and different to Netflix and YouTube. The sharing of live moments of magic, on stage and in the auditorium and in every workshop, to learn, to celebrate and to change. Digital worlds are exceptional. I can't imagine our sector in this time without them, especially as a company that works with young people, and the opportunities have been pretty thrilling. I've been running a process with 30 young people meeting twice a week as we connect and negotiate our way through this strange time. They perform their piece online next Friday and I'm blown away by what they have made through this platform and embraced its parameters. This project is also enabling us to engage with many people that we previously couldn't, being able to bring the activity to people's homes, negating issues around things like transport, a particular barrier in rural Wales. 2 days a week, every week, we are on the phone to our older citizens, writing the most passionate, honest and charming letter to the people of North West Wales. We are collaborating with artists to discuss, again through digital platforms, to develop, interrogate what our future programme might look like. Since lockdown, we've commissioned close to 20 artists to develop new ideas for a programme full of daring, ambitious and youthful work. But we miss the subtlety of what we do, and miss the ability to respond with the intimate and with the epic, in performance and in facilitation. To close, I've been asked to look to the future and what it is that we can do to ensure our cultural venues not only survive, but thrive. The very nature of this question places the lens on our exceptional venues, of who I fully support and understand their situation and truly fear the ever-growing threat that we do face. But for me, it's impossible to talk about the venues without talking about the grassroots theatre companies based across Wales, many of which working in the Welsh language, at the heart of our communities every single day. Only through genuine collaboration and conversation between buildings and these smaller producing companies will we thrive. Having only been in this role for a few months, I'm so pleased to say that in this time I've spoken to so many companies and artists across the country, and collaboration has been at the centre of every conversation. Only through this, I believe our theatres will be full again, and more important than full, truly reflect the length and breadth of Wales, its unique, complex and passionate identity. Through working at this grassroots heart of community, we can do what we need to do to play an active part in the rehabilitation of society, as individuals and as we as a sector relearn what it means to come together, to listen, share, discuss, debate and inspire, and hopefully change. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much indeed, Gethin. We're going to go to Graeme next. You're the artistic director of a large venue, the WMC, the Wales Millennium Centre, and we've heard in the press about the prospects of the financial impact of COVID-19 on you as an organisation. Can you talk to us, please, about how you're responding to that financial impact and also the other challenges which Gethin has set out from his perspective there? What do you think now is possible that perhaps wasn't possible before? And what's something practical that can be implemented to make sure that the WMC can also survive and thrive as other venues too?
Diolch yn fawr. I'm going to be very brief about the financial challenges. Wales Millennium Centre could be shut until spring next year. That's a whole year without audiences. That's a whole year without income. Financially, the cost of this is £20 million this year. Then there'll be further losses the following year because we're already seeing that unfold. It's not just us. There's going to be a domino effect, and venues are on the precipice. I can see some leaders of other venues in the room who I've talked to, and they know what I'm talking about. There is a need for very quick action here. But the real cost is human, for our staff, for people who come here to be entertained, for artists who make work for us, for young people who come to create and learn, for communities who come here to talk or to share food and to celebrate their culture with us, for some volunteers who I know and have told us are feeling lonely now. I don't want to talk about how venues can survive and thrive, but about how an ecology can change, survive and thrive. The opportunity is to listen and to engage in new conversations about how we can rebuild on stronger, more inclusive and resilient foundations. Foundations have been shaken and walls that seem solid are crumbling. And then there were walls that aren't physical and they've crumbled too. And that's a good thing because some of those walls were keeping some people out. We need to spend time and to invest in how we make things happen, in processes and methods, in thoughtful, deep work over time. What would it look like to involve communities and artists, young people in how we do things rather than conscripts into what we've already decided to do? Like if this was your home and you'd invited some people you'd only just met round for dinner and one of your guests said, "Didn't you know I was vegan?" It's better sometimes to let people choose the menu and come in and use your kitchen and for us to set the table and do the dishes. The arts will only be a doorstep issue when we're on your doorstep and inviting you to participate and have an opinion and build with us. The evaluation of our work is based too much on metrics. This stifles progress. Can all of our funding reports be written by the people that use our buildings and also people who work with us outside of our buildings? Can we rely on testimonials and not Excel spreadsheets? What lies in the hearts and minds of our audiences? What do our audiences who don't currently come think of us? Most importantly, what does this look like years from now? It is not good enough to track small incremental change over time with quotas and so on. There are ideas that can be implemented, such as adopting methods of co-constructed work with young people and communities, or participatory budgeting, for example, both of which we have relatively recently adopted at WMC. These methods give people agency and joy and a stake in what we do. We are working currently while we're shut with young people to design creative spaces within our building that would be run by them for them. And you know what? They might even make money in years to come. And we're still going to put on Les Mis, but this is where the profits will be spent as and when they come back. And in the meantime, this is how we're going to spend our time with artists, communities and young people. Virtue signalling over. Wales as a small nation can adopt principles and methodologies that focus on how. Policy is great, Wales is good at that, but how is much harder and Wales is not so good at that. I worked in Ireland for 20 years, most recently in Derry on the City of Culture 2013 programme. One of the metrics council and government had for us was to reduce unemployment. I think it was by 1%, no pressure. I hear stories trickle through of how, for example, a young person involved in violence who took part in a programme that we ran is now a community leader 7 years later. Measure that. In Belfast, in Derry, or Londonderry, or Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, or the 6 counties, or Ulster, the ground was shaking all of the time. When I came to Wales, I sort of breathed a sigh of relief. And my wife and I have reflected on what it feels like to live in a place not dealing with the trauma of conflict, where people are not attacking each other, not with baseball bats, bombs and bullets, and they're just the ones beginning with B. Wales is a great place and we love it here, but now I realise the ground was shaking here too. And in the last few months, there have been lots of calls to tear down the walls of institutions and pot shots directed at each other. Some of it has been needed and welcome, and some of it is unpleasant. So can we rebuild together, please, and not attack each other? I received this message last night from someone in Tiger Bay or Butte Town. There are a couple of names for that place too. And I asked if I could read it today, as I think it is relevant. I was against the Opera House, and resented WMC being built, while I wasn't even entitled to consider myself as an artist. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, I was on my way to County Hall with my granddaughter, age 3, and we went past Wales Millennium Centre, and she said, "Look, that's where we do the carnival." At first, I was pleased as punch that carnival had already been imprinted, but then I realised the centre is also imprinted in her mind as part of her community, not something that's been built over something else. And now it's just as much a part of a landmark in our history as anything. Of course, we still want more of everything, but I've figured out that the best way forward is just to go forward. Diolch yn fawr.
Graeme, thank you very much indeed. Rabab, it's a very good segue to your conversation now too. You're a freelance artist yourself, and through Gentle Radical, you work with a community and social justice remit. And you've talked on your website about being committed to democratising and decolonising cultural spaces. Now, today's discussion is, we're conscious of the moment in which we have this conversation today, and it's not a whole session, for instance, about Black Lives Matter, because we think that deserves a totally separate conversation. But decolonising cultural spaces feels even more relevant given the events of recent weeks. But some of those physical spaces are at severe risk of extinction. Can you talk about the challenges that you face from your own particular perspective, what you think the opportunities are, please? And what you think are ideas or actions that can be implemented to make sure that culture survives and thrives?
I can try.
Thank you.
I haven't prepared 5 minutes. I'm going to try and freestyle this. But first of all, I just wanted to say that I suppose I don't think those two things are separate questions. A discussion about COVID and discussions about the structural violence, the structural colonial spaces and contexts, the contexts of white supremacy within which all of our cultural spaces exist and flourish for some and not for others, are deeply key to these issues. And they're deeply key because, of course, we have seen how those inequalities map across COVID for very specific communities. So I can talk about, what we do at Gentle Radical, and I can talk about the fact that, we're not building based. We're a tiny, small organisation. We are 3 years old. The experience of instability and precarity and working as freelancers, and no one is salaried in our organisation. So we're actually always doing a number of different things in terms of all of the associates we work with. I can talk about that, and in some ways COVID exacerbates those precarities, and in other ways we are actually wired, to kind of, in a way, deal with those precarities on a daily basis, precarities which of course Brexit and austerity have just enhanced and increased. But I want to talk really about our audiences and the people that we work with, and we have a very long-term remit within all of our work. So what we fundamentally believe in when we talk about decolonising is that the heart and the very core of our work must be to make those at the margins our mainstream. I can't stress this enough. And when I think about the sense of, when we talk about thriving and surviving, there's a really fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves, particularly within our mainstream cultural spaces, around what do we mean when we say thriving? On behalf of who is that thriving happening? Who is actually thriving within our cultural sector? Who are the people that do not get a look in within the spaces that we're currently continually working within? And it's not just about all of the usual issues that we face, which are lack of representation, lack of outreach to audiences, lack of long-term inclusion, the fact that our entire cultural sector essentially uses excluded audiences, excluded communities, marginalised groups as a means. So people like myself and other people in the sector would really argue that as long as we're using audiences and excluded groups as a means to tick box the continuation of our core programs, we have a real problem. So what I would argue is, how does COVID, how does the colossal precarity that we're all facing enable us to do a much deeper and more radical reset? Because the experiences of the people that we work with, we have to do quite extensive, deep and ongoing outreach work to reach a lot of the minority ethnic communities we work with. And for those people, there is not just a kind of seamless, easy kind of migration onto spaces online, for example. In fact, we don't, the large portion of the people that we're working with, we don't necessarily meet them on Twitter. We're not necessarily contacting them on Facebook. There are so many complex and multiple barriers for a lot of the people we work with that it's a very different kind of ground up work. And what is really clear for us is if we're just parachuting in and out, as has been the staple of so many cultural organisations and our cultural systems, then we're still using people as a means. As long as we're using people as a means to tick box our inclusion and engagement agendas, we would argue we're still working within the remit of a colonial system and a colonial project. So for us, I've got a few seconds left. What would I like to see happening? I would really like profoundly to see us take on a level of seriousness that we have never yet risen to in terms of dismantling some of the really profound inequalities at the heart of our cultural systems. And to do that in a way which is deeply rigorous and deeply conscious of the decades in which we've been trying to do that work and have failed. Otherwise, there is a real question about what is it we are trying to save, for whom, and how does the saving of those spaces just perpetuate existing inequities across our system? That has to change.
Very powerful challenge, Rabab. Thank you very much indeed. Gwennan, I'm going to come to you now. From Theatr Clwyd's perspective, obviously the building is closed, like everywhere else, and all performances are cancelled. But that hasn't stopped you. What can you tell us about putting on Theatr Clwyd together? What is it, and what can other people learn from it, please? And also, from your perspective, what is something that could be done or an idea that could be developed to make sure that cultural venues survive and thrive? And then we're going to open up the conversation afterwards.
Cool, diolch yn fawr. What incredible stuff everyone has said already, and just to explain, yeah, my job at Theatr Clwyd is I'm Director of Creative Engagement, so I look after all of our community work that we do within the theatre. I'm absolutely freestyling this as well. I definitely haven't prepared an awesome speech. It's just been really, really difficult to kind of shift, I think, at the moment, and how we've all kind of, I think, as a workforce had to really shift our way of working. We have been able to continue all of our community work, which has been a really interesting development for us, I think, because that is the only thing that's kept us going. And how, yes, we don't have a building to work from, and we're all working from home. We've kept our relationships going. We've had deeper partnerships explored and developed through this time. We've kind of shifted our priorities to really support other partnerships. So, the work that we've started with social services has grown massively, and I guess our kind of brief has just totally shifted. I think the big thing about this is to create sustainable and meaningful partnerships within our communities. It's you know, it's one of the big worries that I think I am kind of figuring out at the moment with our young people is their mental health at this time. I work with 5 really vulnerable young people at the moment that are, their home is not their safe space, and our theatre used to be. And how can we create safe spaces for people when they don't even feel safe at home? So it's a shift for everyone, isn't it? And those difficult kind of means of not being able to be in a space with people and create theatre or art in the same way as we normally do is really tough. We have created digital content, but what I think is really important is that it's not about us creating it for us to be seen to be creating things on a digital platform, that it's actually something that people want to take part in, and that it is for people and with people, not just to make us look good as a theatre company. And I think how everyone in the industry and in culture sectors at the moment are going to survive and not just survive but thrive from this is to start listening. I think we need to do a lot of listening at the moment, and how we properly open doors in different ways and in proper kind of, you know, let's have these hard discussions. Let's talk to people. Let's really get down to the kind of the core of why has theatre been so exclusive and on a pedestal compared to other means of expressing ourselves, and how do we truly make it accessible is a question that I guess we still don't know, I don't think. And I think something that we as an industry also need to learn from this time and take on board is that this isn't just a tick a box kind of way of kind of let's do some work at the moment that kind of shows that we're doing loads of work, if that makes sense. I'm kind of rambling now, I should have prepared a speech. But let's use the platform of digital media and as another way of reaching people, not just as oh yeah, we did that, then we connected loads of different people and then let's move on to our proper audiences. Can we stop seeing kind of community work and audiences as separate things as well? Like I think there's a new way of thinking about all of this, really. I've rambled, but yeah, I think this is an amazing opportunity for all of us to shift and think how we can work together, yeah, to really start listening.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Gwennan. We're really conscious when we put these conversations together that both the choice of title, the choice of speakers makes it sometimes look as though there's just one particular angle. We know that it's much more complicated than that, and I think that's come through from the conversation from each of you just now. There's some really big stuff in all of those initial openers. I want to pick up on a few of them while Andy, our moderator, is bringing through some of the questions from the chat room. Can we talk a little bit about the support that you're getting, please, from Welsh Government and other funding organisations on the one hand? And I also want to just pick up on, you know, COVID-19 is a critical juncture for everybody about everything and in a way that can blow our minds. So what is it that we need to grab onto in terms of the important stuff? There's some really good challenges about what we measure, what we value, and we know that what gets measured is what gets valued, but we're all talking now about valuing things differently and needing to value things differently. There's an opportunity here to address many of the inequalities, and you've all spoken very eloquently about about that are present in not only Wales, but right across the world. There's huge issues about accessibility in that mix, and huge issues around not using excluded groups and marginalised groups as a way to jump over hurdles and pat ourselves on the back that we're doing things appropriately. These are really important challenges, and they're challenges that we've had for a while, and there may well be challenges that will continue for a while too. But we hope that this moment is something that can break down both conversations and barriers and silos of thinking about things as well, because none of us experiences our life in a way which is predicated on the streams of either funding or activity that we operate within. And we have to be pragmatic. So I guess I just want to come back to you with those two things. One is the support that you're receiving. Is that the right kind of support? What do you want Welsh Government and others to be doing? Maybe you don't get any Welsh Government funding and it's a totally different question, in which case, can you set that out for us? And then secondly, how do we shape that narrative? Do we need a collective narrative about what matters now and how we value it? Gethin, I'm going to come back to you, please, first.
Yeah, thank you. I think please tell me if I've misunderstood any of the provocations or the questions. In terms of funding support, we are a revenue funded organisation through the Arts Council of Wales. That funding from Arts Council is being honoured, as far as we know, for this financial year. We also have received some additional support from them over the last couple of months due to a loss of funding from other funding streams. As I said before, the budget-wise and financial-wise, it's this constant measuring it, constantly like micromanaging it, and having about 50 plans on your page to go actually what fits here. And I think this ties into potentially the second part of your question, which that's actually been quite a useful exercise in hammering down what it is that we're doing and going, what is the essence and the function and the purpose of what we're doing, and how can we honour that within various different financial parameters, I guess. And could you just repeat the second question for me, Oriel? It
was really about what do we need a kind of collective conversation about what matters in this, in the current situation in terms of what we value and what's important and where we need to go forward? Or is it okay that everyone does slightly different things depending on where they sit in this ecology?
I think it's both. I think there is a huge cultural conversation to have about everything Rabab was talking about so articulately about breaking down our perception of the work that we do. And I think collectively as a sector, there's a job of work to be done in going, actually, what are we failing at? And getting away from box ticking and going, actually, within the function of what we do, our belief of what we do, what is that? But then on the other hand, I also think Wales is small, as Graeme was saying, but it's also beautifully varied. You drive 20 minutes and you are in a very, very, very different place. And that's something where I think variety is a beautiful thing for us to talk about and can feed into this collective conversation. Cardiff is a very different place to where I'm based up in Northwest Wales. And I think through the conversation of what we're doing in both those places and the sharing of that practice and that ambition, I think that collective conversation can help us unpack what we're doing collectively, but also strengthen what we're doing independently within our local areas.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There's a question here from Helen from the National Museum Wales am Gethin Cymru. As part of the rebuild, she agrees with you about we need to work together rather than attack. She'd like to see us broaden the definition of arts organisations to include cultural and heritage venues and organisations such as national and local museums. And there are opportunities to develop further collaborations and share learning from COVID-19 and really push for a cultural strategy for Wales. Do you agree? And what would you want to see in that cultural strategy?
Yeah, I do agree.
Sorry, Gethin, I'm going to come to Graeme on that,
Yeah.
and I'm just going to flip around.
Yes, I think we should widen the conversation, but the conversation needs to be wider than those people who are running venues and sitting in the room. So, which is Rabab's point.
Yeah.
I think also that on the other point is, this is the rebuilding. The paradigm is going to shift. The rebuilding is going to take deep, slow work over time. Wales Millennium Centre was not built on some of the foundations that Rabab has been talking about. Now, to change that is like a 10-year job. And it's a job that you don't broadcast about either. I've mentioned some of the methodologies that I think that Wales could adopt. And I think that as Wales has adopted, for example, the Future Generations Act, it could adopt methodologies and be world leading at some things that are about inclusion and participation in arts. And to be honest, the outputs follow from the deep work and the processes. This is my point about focusing on the how and not the what all the time, and reporting on what and metrics rather than looking at processes, how they can be improved and how they can be built upon. I mean, look, I'm sitting here on my own in Wales Millennium Centre in an organisation that is absolutely torn to shreds now. I actually agree about what we need to rethink about, what we want to preserve and what we want to thrive in future. As I said, that will take a long time. The next few months will be about survival for a lot of people, but it's important that we take the long view and think about what we want Wales to look like in 10 years, 20 years time. And it is actually an opportunity when things are paused to reset. Now, and I don't think, for example, England can reset in the same way that Wales can. It's just that, and apart from anything else, there are like so many different, in inverted commas, countries within England that it's unbelievable. So I would really want to plea for long, reflective, thoughtful work around this together, and not with just venues and arts organisations, but with communities and people who are excluded from the arts.
Thanks, Graeme. So, Rabab, coming back to you, the change is needed. How do we embed that? How do we embrace that discourse and have the courage to dig deep and reset things culturally, and do everything else that needs to, everything else that needs to happen too? Where would you start? How would you go about it? Talk to us about the how, because I think there's an agreement, isn't there, across the panel about the what. And, you know, there is often an implementation challenge from lofty ideas and principles, and essential ideas and principles. How do you do it? How would you do it?
Do you know what? It's always, you know, I kind of have to take a deep breath every time we're asked about the how, because I can honestly say, since the very first report that was written by Nassim, the late great Nassim Khan, in 1976, which was called The Arts That Britain Ignores, when we didn't even have an Arts Council of Wales, it was the Arts Council of Great Britain. We have 45 years of inclusion and engagement and diversity and equalities policy looking at the gaps. So I absolutely don't need to address the how. There are millions of words that have been written about the how. The question we have to ask is, why are we not implementing those equalities and those engagement policies and those, you know, we all are sick to death of words like BAME and diversity, and the list goes on. The problem is, when we talk about saving and we talk about survival, that inherently is predicated on us fixing things but surviving first. And me and many people would challenge that paradigm. The whole point is the system is rotten. It does not represent everyone. It does not take care of the cultural needs of everyone. It excludes on a institutional basis. You know, and like, as small arts organisations like our own are constantly being approached by mainstream cultural organisations who want us to do their diversity and inclusion work for them. This is a constant. Pre-lockdown, I will get contacted literally 9, 10, 11 times a month for anything from, can you do some diversity work for us? In other words, can you please engage audiences that we are failing epically to engage with? Could you do some of that work for us? That, none of that is stated, but it's all of that is subtextual. So, like, I don't have any sense of, if I went to some of the groups and individuals and communities we work with, and I said, you know, I'm gonna name 3, 4, 5 leading cultural venues in the city. How do you feel about, you know, the loss of those venues? They actually would probably go, I don't really know, because I don't attend them. Okay, that's so, like, if we have to define what does survival mean. I keep coming back to this: for whom and on whose terms. And the assumption, even in this room, with respect, is that it is the survival of a culture that is already embedded and committed and investing to supporting certain groups, certain artists and certain venues. And until that changes, there is no radical change. We'll be simply taking another decade to try and stabilise ourselves, and we'll be putting back this work, and we cannot afford to do that. So yes, my argument would be some provision, some venues, some spaces may be lost in this process. And for some that's going to be tough, but that is nothing compared to the decades and centuries of systemic violence that our cultural systems simply uphold and keep perpetuating. We have to look at that with honesty.
So I think it's an absolutely fair challenge in terms of the language as well. What is the language in terms of the narrative, the collective new narrative that we want to build? And yeah, I'm thinking, where can we go with what we have right now? There is a question that's come through around survival, which I'm not going to pick up on because I don't think it would be appropriate at this particular point in time. I'd like to come to, there's a question from Alison Woods about how Wales's approach and thinking is different or similar to DCMS in terms of the reopening of venues. And I'm also happy to go to a question around resilience too. So there's a question that's come in from, which I think plays into probably more usefully in terms of supporting whose resilience. And that's, I guess, a good follow on from your challenge there, Rabab. So let's go to that first, which is about structural change being a priority. As without living wages for individual artists, there is no art and no art institutions either. Gwennan, can you talk to us a bit about that structural change, please?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think it's about, again, you know, it's about looking at what again theatre is, and who it's for, and how we have conversations with all sizes of institutions, but artists as well. Like, the work that's being made at the moment is you know, is some companies are able to continue doing stuff and develop stuff and continue to kind of explore. But I think it's about absolutely keeping in conversations and talking to each other and seeing what priorities lie, I guess. Yeah, I think I think there is a real chance to have discussions and see how we can shift things, but it has to be through conversations. It has to be through churning out what it all is really, and having an understanding of what is the importance of the arts, of culture, to Wales, because it is personal, isn't it? It is there's something magical about I think the work, the texture of the work that happens here, the different levels of it, the different kind of the stories that we can tell, the power of storytelling is huge. But are we saying the right stories? Is the right stories being told in the right way? Like, can this be a time where we can question whose story should be told?
I think that's really helpful, actually, Gwennan. And I think one of the reasons why I find this difficult is because it's such a huge and multifaceted set of issues. There's issues around storytelling and how we who decides whose stories need to be told and where and how. There's issues around music and what that does to people. So, you know, arts and culture means so many different things to so many different people. There's issues around, you know, representations in museums and in galleries, and we've seen a lot of the importance of that coming to the fore, particularly recently over the last couple of weeks. There's issues around how theatre companies and venues engage with where they are and the place-based nature of that and the importance of that, and what has also happened in that place. What was the story of that place? What is it now? And what do the people who live and work there want that to be in the future? So I'm very happy to be challenged on language and how we do things. I don't profess to be either an expert in cultural issues in Wales in any shape or form. Are there things that are perhaps more radical in terms of interventions that can be taken now to help enable that conversation and that shift to happen? So, for instance, there's something about, and I'm going to stick with the venue side of things at the moment, because there's something around spaces that may need to be used in a very different way, and yet we also want to make sure they don't get hoovered up by property developers, for instance, if they were to go under. Is there something that can be done there that can open up and unpick things? I think there's a conversation around place that is happening in other spheres across Wales, and we see that because of the inequalities that exist in Wales in other policy areas as well, and other sectors where people live and work and what they see as the future of that place. So there's something really, really powerful there. Can I throw that open and come, Gethin, back to you from that perspective, please?
Yeah, I think the idea of space is really interesting. Whose space? Whose space is it? Who is it for? And what's the action that happens in there? I think theatre is an action. The arts is an action. It happens in a space, but that space also is happening across Wales in community centres, in community pantos, in pubs, in schools. Like that idea of space, I think, is much broader. I think our cultural venues are an enormous part of that, but challenging whose space they are, I think, is essential, and taking time to listen and consider that. There was a brilliant, just to jump back on a couple of things as well, and that need to listen and change the way in which we work, and what Rabab was talking about, in that it is there in front of us. And I think it's the process in which, the conventional process in which it operates. Ned Glacier, who runs an amazing company called Company 3, a young people's company, wrote a blog about filtered through, not down. And it's the idea of who are we to make a piece of work, hand it over to community and then engage, rather than go, let's engage, let's talk, let's interrogate, let's discuss, and let's let the work come from this. And I think that is personally something I've carried with me and carried with me at the minute a lot, and going, how are we opening those doors at the beginning of any process as opposed to at the end of it? And I think that applies to every space in which this is every space in which we work.
Okay, thank you. Rabab, would you like to come back in and see and set us the next challenge?
Well, I mean, I've talked for a long time about this idea of the cultural epicenter. So what we think engagement work, the models we have for engagement work, which basically are failing us, is that we say, here is a cultural epicenter. It's a mainstream cultural space. It's building based. Our aim is to get everyone in, all of these people on the outskirts, on the margins. This is a totally broken model. One, it presumes a whole range of colonial and cultural authoritative pronouncements on who comes, who engages, what the work is, who the artists are. That has to shift. In terms of some, and unfortunately, because institutions are not making that their priority, it is still second best, it is still tokenized, it is still an add-on. People are having to be forced to be accountable, and unfortunately our funding systems are still not making people accountable. What can happen, and what can happen today, and what could have happened yesterday, and definitely can happen tomorrow, is embed artists. Nothing stops artists working in communities. Now, the historical models we have with that is artists like me. I've experienced this many times, partly why I set up Gentle Radical. I was absolutely fed up of being complicit in processes where I am parachuted in for 6 months or a year, parachuted out again. We literally just start managing to create rich work. It's the end, but an institution has lots of photos to put in their reports, etc., etc. This is again another form of kind of extractivism and colonialism. So embed artists, and I mean embed artists permanently in communities. So I've lived in Riverside for 23 years now. I would like to continue working in Riverside until basically I drop dead. Hopefully that's another 30, 35 years. You know, like I'd have no problem with that. We just need to go deeper, deeper, deeper. And then what starts to happen when we embed practitioners and artists within communities in the long term. And that does not have to be hugely costly. And actually, if in Wales, we really fight for universal basic income, maybe artists won't actually struggle to do that as much as they do in the hugely precarious environments we have. If you embed artists for long-term periods, they build and help build and collaborate and engage people in building a cultural ecology that emerges out of that place. It emerges out of the sense of the needs, the lack, the exclusions, and people work around and answer those needs. And that's long term, and then you start to build culture in a radically different way.
So it's by no means there is no quick fix to this. These are long-standing issues. Graeme, can I come to you, because you've got a very particular geographical focus, haven't you, in remit?
Just on that point, I mean, one thing that, I mean, you know, you're blind to it sometimes, even though I've been working in the arts for 20 years. And one of the things that we really recognised recently, that this is a building that we employ hundreds of people, right, and very few artists, and that's just not the reason why. You know, artists are even conscripts into what we do, but if artists were involved in how we do things and what we decide to do, rather than be commissioned to write plays or whatever, that would be a very different dynamic. The accountability factor does not work, and it works against inclusion and process. So for example, community ticket schemes are just designed to try and drag people into things that they might not want to experience. And I think there is an opportunity to reset a lot of this. You know, buildings are, and also to participatory budgeting, for example, you could use all of that money that you put towards ticket schemes to ask communities how they would want to spend it.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. Gwennan, I'm going to come to you, please, with the sort of last question I'm going to everybody with, which is, there are lots of challenging conversations at the moment, and that's absolutely right and proper in all sorts of ways. I don't want to gloss over anything at all. I think they are challenging, and we need to reflect on them and our own roles in what we do, how we live, where we choose to spend our time, put our focus, spend our money. Could you talk to us, please, from your professional and personal perspective about something you're going to take away from this conversation and move forward? And then I'm going to come to the rest of the panel on that too, please, because I think there's something about COVID-19 that is breaking down the barriers between my job is this and as a person I do that. And I want to just sort of pick that a little bit, please.
Yeah, for the future from this conversation, I'd love to continue this conversation with all of us. I think there's Rabab, you're saying incredible stuff that like I'd love to talk more to you about how all of this works, and just to go off something you said earlier in terms of, you know, artists working within communities. It's also then about those communities having empowerment to build themselves and take that sustainability away with them as well, isn't it? How can we empower people to really feel that you know, the arts is there, is to take, is to absolutely change and shift and rule the world with. Like, it doesn't have to be the same people all the time. I hope at this, you know, this COVID time is a time for us to really shift practice, and again, I'm going back to what I said at the beginning, even that I was totally freestyling. It's about listening at the moment. I think there are so many important and brilliant conversations happening at the moment where if we were all in our busy lives, we couldn't be having. You know, the debates that's happening at the moment, the kind of the young people that are taking over our social medias and bringing up conversations that we should have had years ago, is phenomenal, I think. And I think the power at the moment is to listen for once. Let's take a step back and listen, and then let's not just then throw it all in the bin. Let's do something about it, because it's a time to change.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Gwennan. Rabab, I'm going to come to you next, please, in terms of what you're taking away from this conversation and what you think is your thing to pick up on.
Yeah, I really agree with Gwennan. Actually, there's a great activist and writer called Bayo Komolafe, and he says, the times are urgent, so we must slow down. And if anyone wants to know about kind of how we can do this emergent strategic work, a really brilliant book by Adrienne Marie Brown is Emergent Strategy, and she talks about moving at the pace of trust. That's trust interinstitutionally, between small organisations and large, but really critically in terms of our communities. And I know that there's been some comments about, like, how do we embed, you know, real innovation and professionalism and all the rest of it, you know, in terms of artists within communities. When we are with communities for a very long time, we literally grow the artists of the future. We grow young people and artists who are going to serve us in the future. The other thing I'm going to end with, which is, like, the arts, you know, just aren't everything. There are some people who literally, like, forget it. They're just trying to figure out how they're eating at the moment. And I just think there are huge spaces of privilege in which we discuss these things. So anyone who has used hashtag Black Lives Matter this week, and there will be many of us, all of us, I hope, I really want us to understand that. I'm trying to understand what it means for Black lives to matter, and for me to step up my work to make that a reality. So one of the things I would say is what COVID raises is phenomenal issues around food justice, food security, food safety. I would like to see any venue that returns to normality, and I hope there will never be a return to normality as we've known it. I'd like to see every single venue actually developing the means to work with everyone across the board to grow food. If all our communities are growing food together, we are preparing ourselves for a future which is going to be unstable in terms of climate change, and we need to start taking action on that. And then we will break bread together and figure out how to do this work together. Thank you very much indeed, Rabab. I think that cross-policy aspect of it is super important, and climate change is right. It's already upon us, and resilience is going to mean all sorts of different things in lots of different ways and in lots of different places across the country. Gethin, can I come to you in terms of growing the artists of the future, please?
Yeah.
What are you taking away from the conversation, and what are you going to do?
What am I taking away is this, is having been reminded actually and re-listening to this idea of embedding deeper and deeper into community, and what happens when we allow ourselves to do that on very, very local specific levels. And that is what I will, and Gwennan will continue to focus our energy on that local area of Northwest Wales, and to reiterate what Gwennan and Rabab has said, is to listen and challenge everything I think that was normal.
Okay, thank you. Graeme, from your perspective, please.
You know, I think it's true that we don't want to reopen. We want to reopen as something different. And you know, sometimes it's hard to do that when you're running a juggernaut all the time. And I think that's why there is an opportunity here. I think we've talked about it internally, but actually I think growing food in all of our institutions is a really great idea. Look, one of the things about listening is the sharing of perspectives and knowledge. And in fact, I want to thank Rabab for actually sending me a link to the book that she's just talked about, which I'd never read, and I've just started reading it. So it's that kind of exchange that's valuable here. Not venues talking to venues and community artists, you know, talking, which they generally don't, just talking within communities, but actually trying to develop an ecology which is inclusive of all of that work, and getting people to speak on our behalf rather than me sitting here talking about them.
Okay, I know you've got to go, Graeme. I'm sorry I came to you last. Thank you very much indeed, Graeme. And thank you to all the panellists who've joined the conversation today. What we've been trying to do with these conversations, these Rethinking Wales, is really listen to what's going on and actively listen to the issues that people are bringing up. So I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to you for that. It's meant with the best of intentions, and knowing that as organisations, none of us get it right any of the time. Sometimes we get some of it right some of the time. And what we really are trying to do is air what people are thinking and talking about, so that people from other sectors can also understand what's going on over here, because we know that a lot of these conversations are treated very separately and very distinctly, and supported and funded very separately and distinctly. But actually what we're hearing through a lot of these conversations is there's all sorts of crossover that don't really get appreciated in the way, or acted on in the way that they should be. So I feel you know, sometimes chairing these conversations is really hard, and I think it's really good when you feel uncomfortable in these situations, because it's like, oh yeah, you know, I hadn't realised that perhaps using this word was going to be perceived in a particular way, or that it's going to be felt in a different way by other people. And I think that's a good thing, and I have no problem with feeling that. You know, I have no problem with feeling that, because I think we all need to reflect on what we do, how we do it, how that's perceived, and what that means to everybody, and what we can do with the spaces that we have. I think the IWA is a really useful organisation, and one of the things we've been trying to do is really open it up across different sectors, because we don't represent a sector, trade or interest. opening up to people in lots of different ways. So please, by all means, do use the platforms that we have. Very happy for that to happen. I would like to thank everybody, Gethin, Evans, Graeme, Farrow, Rabab, Ghazoul and Gwennan, Mair, Jones. We have had a really good turnout again for today's conversation. These invitations go to our members and also to the wider public. We're looking at making them even bigger. We've got a logistical issue in that at the moment we're trying to resolve. But if you do want to receive early notifications of future IWA events, all currently online, which is a bonus at the moment because it means that we can reach far further afield than sometimes we have previously. They're all recorded and on our new YouTube channel. Do please join us as a member at iwa.wales, about us and support us. Next week, as part of our ongoing debate series with Cardiff University, our topic will be, will COVID-19 be the making or breaking of devolution? So if you're interested in that, do come along. We're going to, the panelists and I are going to jump off the call now, but we're going to leave the chat room open for other conversations now. Please just remember all chat conversations are available as a transcript afterwards for the IWA team. We hope to pick up on some of the ideas. If you're interested in writing on some of those for the blog, do please get in touch, or we might get in touch with you. Thank you again for taking part, and really hope you can join us for the next conversation. Thank you all.